everybody. Welcome to another fabulous episode of Thyroid Refresh TV. I'm Dana Bowman, co-founder of Thyroid Refresh and Thyroid 30.
And I'm Ginny Mahar, the other co-founder, and we are so excited to be here today with Dr. Eric Balcavage. Welcome. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you.
To talk about why TSH is not enough, guys. So we're going to be covering a lot of your burning questions about testing and what do I need and what's really going on in my body. We're going to get a much more in-depth picture, I think, for everyone today with Dr. Eric, who is the host of the Thyroid Answers podcast. So,
yeah, I want to give you his background because this is long and awesome. Okay, Dr. Eric Balcavage is the owner and founder of Rejuvagen. I love that name, a functional and regenerative medicine clinic in Glen Mills, Pennsylvania. He is a nationally recognized speaker and educator on various health-related topics, including thyroid physiology, bile physiology, detoxification, oxidative stress, methylation, and chronic illness. He's been in private practice in Glen Mills since 1996. He's certified nutrition specialist, certified functional medicine practitioner, board certified in integrative medicine, along with being a licensed chiropractor. He's the co-host, as Jenny said earlier, of Thyroid Answers podcast. And the podcast focuses on answering the pressing questions those that suffer with chronic hypothyroid symptoms can't get answered elsewhere, which we're going to also do a little bit today. And he has made it his mission to change the way medicine looks at hypothyroidism, and we're so glad to have you on the show to do just that and to do all the good you do out in the world. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You know, we're always happy and excited to connect with a fellow thyroid warrior. Can you tell us your thyroid story? How did you become so passionate about helping other thyroid patients thrive?
Well, it really started with family members. I had a family member who was told that they had hypothyroidism, fibroids, and iron deficiency, and that the solution for that person in their, 30s, early 30s, was to take out their, uterus and ovaries and put them on thyroid medication and put them on iron. And, I didn't really know that much in the beginning about thyroid physiology, but I didn't think that was the appropriate thing for a 30-year-old person to be having done. I mean, organs are in the body for a reason. And it just didn't seem, even from a chiropractic background, I was like, maybe those organs are there for a reason. I came from a medical background even before I went to chiropractic school. So I understood the medical viewpoint, but I just thought there was something different that needed to be done. And so I wound up digging into thyroid physiology. I started doing functional medicine study as I could, really learning about it. Dr. Karazian was one of my early mentors in thyroid physiology, and realized that what my family member was probably dealing with was something called Hashimoto's thyroiditis and not primary hypothyroidism per se, like her gland just out of the blue became a problem. And I didn't think that taking the organs out, I wasn't sure about the iron physiology, putting iron more on her system was the answer. So I just started digging in and kind of trying to help her. And in that process and really learning the stuff, I started talking to my chiropractic patients, and it's unbelievable how many people were on thyroid medications or were struggling with chronic hypothyroid symptoms. So that really led me down this path and it evolved me, my practice, and where I am today. That thyroid physiology is a passion of mine. It is one of those things I think is grossly misunderstood in both in really allopathic medicine primarily, but also even in functional medicine. And I think we need to have a different conversation when it comes to what hypothyroid is. And that's what we try and do on the podcast. And I think we'll do that today as well.
So this is a very common issue for those of us who are hypothyroid or even subclinical hypothyroid. We go into our checkups and we complain that we have symptoms, or maybe we have residual symptoms in spite of T4 medication and normal TSH. And we're often dismissed by our doctors who say, it's not related. It's, eat less, exercise more. I mean, all kinds of things that people hear, take an antidepressant, et cetera. Can you talk to us about the problem with traditional treatment for hypothyroidism and why TSH is not enough?
Absolutely. So in allopathic medicine, the thought process has always been that TSH is a valid marker of thyroid physiology in the whole body. And we know that what TSH is really can be used as a valid marker of thyroid disease when somebody's in a homeostatic state, like non-stressed in balance. But it's not an optimal indicator of thyroid physiology in all of the cells and tissues of the body. It just isn't, okay? So that's it. That's a misnomer. When we talk about chronic hypothyroid symptoms, when somebody has hypothyroid symptoms, result of lack of active thyroid hormone getting to the nucleus of their period. It is not necessarily about the gland. So most doctors within that medical model have been taught that there isn't a problem with thyroid physiology until the gland becomes dysfunctional. And that is just not true. We have hypothyroid symptoms because of a cellular issue, not because of a glandular issue. Because you can take somebody's gland out and put them on thyroid hormone, and you can normalize them if they don't have any other problems going on. Or you can take their gland out, or crush the gland, or kill the gland, or burn the gland, or whatever you want to do to it, put them on thyroid hormone, and they can still be chronically symptomatic. Now, we've put plenty of thyroid hormone into the system, into the bloodstream, but if active T3 doesn't get to those peripheral cell nuclei, you're going to have hypothyroid symptoms. So hypothyroidism is really a cellular event first, and TSH doesn't monitor that. It doesn't really give us a real good indication of that's going on, at least until we have more severe hypothyroidism and the gland is shutting down and the brain's not getting sufficient levels. So, right, they're under chronic stress, they're under chronic inflammation, chronic infection. And anytime there's so many factors that can influence TSH and make it normal or artificially low, make it look normal, but it's totally inappropriate because of what's going on in their body. And if you're only looking at TSH and not paying attention to what your patient is telling you, or what your patient's other symptoms are, or that they have an inflammatory or infectious state, or they're taking medications like losartan that will lower your TSH, right? They're on a blood pressure medication that'll artificially lower their TSH. I mean, there's so many factors that compromise TSH levels. You just can't use it as a valid marker. And this has been written up in the literature over and over and over again. It's just being ignored.
Mm-hmm. What about what they used to do? It just made me think of this, the reflex test, years and years and years ago.
I think the reflex testing it can be a great tool. I think the biggest problem is if you are, it's subjective. I mean, we can look at it and go, is that slow? Is it not slow? So there is a tool that you can use to measure and quantify the reflex. I just don't think most doctors are going to have that tool in their office. So, and for anybody to kind of whack their reflex, they're going to be like, I don't know, looks slow, looks normal to me, right? So that's a tool. It
just made me think of that, because that's what they used to use a long time ago, right? I mean, there's so many different, there's the TSH, there's this, there's that. It's really not. It's more on a cellular level, like you said.
Yeah, TSH is just way too, the idea that, hey, thyroid physiology is regulated like, okay, the simple loop that we all learned, that is just way too simplistic for how thyroid physiology works. And so it's way more complex. So we'll keep it simple, but there's some great researchers, Huerman, Dietrich, these are guys out of Germany, I think. These guys are some of the in my opinion, some of my favorite authors about thyroid physiology. They look at it more like how I think it should be looked at versus a strict kind of gland thing. They understand that TSH can fluctuate up and down based on what's happening with the physiology in the body. And we can't look at a test and say, oh, it's in range, so therefore the whole physiology is normal. I always tell my patients, and even when I'm educating doctors, we have to look at labs, not from disease ranges, but from optimal ranges, functional ranges. And we have to look at lab tests and determine, is a test normal and appropriate, or is it normal and appropriate, or is it abnormal and appropriate, or abnormal and inappropriate? And that may sound crazy, but if you have chronic hypothyroid symptoms and your TSH is 0.4, right? then you have to say, well, why am I chronically tired and fatigued then? Maybe that TSH, even though it is low normal, or for some people, they would say it's still normal, that's inappropriate for how I'm feeling, right? So that's what I'm saying. You can have a normal value, but it's totally inappropriate because something else is suppressing function. If you've got chronic inflammation, elevated cytokines, TSH may look normal, but if you look at the rest of the thyroid panel, you may say, well, T4 and T3 are really low though. So that's it's a normal value, but it's inappropriate for what's going on in the body. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it does make sense.
We still hear from people every day. And, I went through this experience for 4 years where TSH was the only test that was run for me in regards to thyroid, and nothing else was really offered. Well, and so what do patients need to ask for as part of a more comprehensive thyroid panel?
So there's our problem, right? So the testing is based on the current allopathic model, which is that we're still using the simplistic model that TSH is the determining factor. So as long as TSH is normal, nothing else needs to be done. And insurance companies determine medical necessity of tests really based on what the treatment model is. So if your TSH, if the model says that the treatment for hypothyroid symptoms is thyroid hormone prescription, then I only need to run the tests that are going to help me with that prescription, right? So I don't need, if you have chronic hypothyroid symptoms, if TSH is normal, then you don't have a thyroid physiology problem, because in the allopathic model, the problem starts when the gland becomes dysfunctional, diseased.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's like saying that diabetes doesn't start until you're diabetic, right? Or blood sugar problems don't start until you're diabetic, or cardiovascular disease starts when you have your fatal heart attack, right? Okay.
Which makes no sense.
Absolutely no sense.
But that's the model, right? We see the same model in almost everything. People will be told, your blood sugar's high, don't worry about it, you're not diabetic yet. Okay.
Well,
but
yet.
When do I start taking action, right? When your blood pressure's high, but we can suppress it, so don't worry about it, right? That's not the solution, but that's the model, and it's unfortunate. So what people need to be aware of is that their doctor is not a bad person. Their doctor is following the current standard, right? Standard of care, which is defined like, hey, you run TSH as your screening test. If TSH is out of range, then maybe you run T4, or some people run free T4. And if that is below lab range, then it's appropriate to then prescribe thyroid hormone to normalize the TSH. And when TSH is normalized, then the thyroid physiology in the body is normalized. And unfortunately, that is based on the simplistic homeostatic model, which is not what most of our patients are in. Most of the people struggling with chronic hypothyroid symptoms are in a chronic stress response. And that, when we're in a chronic stress response, our thyroid physiology shifts from this kind of what we call a set point model, this homeostatic model, to a different model, what we call an allostatic model, which everything kind of fluctuates to deal with the stress response. And it's kind of a heavy conversation to get into, but there's been some great papers written on that.
So what do you run when someone comes to you and is dealing with this? What tests do you start with? So
I think if somebody wants to understand what their thyroid physiology is doing, you have to run a comprehensive thyroid panel, right? So TSH, T4, T3, free T4, free T3, reverse T3, T3 uptake, thyroid antibodies. That's your base thyroid panel. I don't think it's good enough. And the problem here is that to get that full panel done, to go to your primary care or your endocrinologist, to ask them to run that, they will not run it. Most doctors will not run it. And for them, it's not medically necessary to run it because it doesn't treat their treatment paradigm. They really don't pay any attention to what reverse T3 is because essentially they've probably been educated that it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is normalizing TSH and T4. Period. End of story.
Can you kind of quickly touch on that, like in layman's terms, the difference between T4 and T3, and then there's, the T3, free T3 and reverse T3, like how do those play with each other?
So T4 and T3 are the primary hormones made in the body, or from the thyroid gland, right? So the vast majority of what the thyroid gland, maybe 90% of what the thyroid gland is making is T4. It's a pre-hormone. It's I hate to say it's not an active hormone. It does have activity, which is what concerns me when people are taking lots of T4 when they shouldn't be, in my opinion, when they shouldn't be. So T4 is like the pre-hormone. It's in a less active state. That's good, because we don't want tons of T3 dumping out into the system, because then we might have tissues that are really close to the thyroid gland that are getting hyperactive states because we have too much of that hormone. T3 is the active hormone. That's the go hormone, okay? And there's a whole bunch. I mean, there's other hormones, thyroid hormones, that we're not even talking about that still have action and function, but these are the things that people are going to see on lab reports. So T4 fluctuates around the body. T3 fluctuates in the body. When you look at your lab report, it says T3, T4. That's the total volume of T4 and T3. Then we talk about free T4 and free T3. These are hormone, the hormone that's not being carried around. So T4 and T3 doesn't float around the body on its own. It actually has to be carried around the body by proteins, right? You can think about them like, and that's something called thyroid binding globulin, but you can think of these carrier proteins like taxicabs. So thyroid hormone and T4, T3, when it's made in the gland, it's released from the gland, it gets in these taxicabs, this thyroid binding globulin, and then it's escorted all over the body, right? Taken through the bloodstream to all the tissues and cells that potentially need it. When there's a cell or tissue that needs thyroid hormone, it's like pulling up to the mall, right? So T4 or T3 gets off of the thyroid binding globulin, out of the taxi cab, or the Uber driver, I think we should say today, right?
Yeah, right.
Now it's free. It can now get into the cell. It's like you can now go into the store to go shop, right? So T4 and T3 is important, but free T4 and free T3 values are really important as well, because that tells you what's available to essentially get into the cells.
Those are the available shoppers. Got it.
Those are the available shoppers, right? So if I take my wife shopping, but I never let her out of the car, I'm good. We didn't spend any money, right? But the action occurs when that T4 and T3 becomes free, but not just when it becomes free, it actually has to get into the cell. And so that's the big problem that we also see, is people say, well, if the blood volume or serum volume of T4 or T3 or free T4 or free T3 is good, then the cells should be supplied. The thought process was that T4 and T3, and we'll say the free T4 and free T3, would just diffuse into the cell from high concentration into the serum to low concentration in the cell, and that's how it got in there. We now know it's an active process. It actually has to be actively transported across the cells, and so it's energy dependent. Once T4, T3 gets into the cell, then the cell determines what happens to that T4 and T3. If the cell metabolism is trying to increase, T4 is converted to T3. And that T3 goes to the nucleus of the cell, binds to the thyroid receptors, bam, it starts stimulating metabolism, okay? Replication, enzymes, genes are activated. If you have T3 that's come in, then T3 can go directly to the nucleus, bind to the receptor, and that can happen. If the cell is trying to down-regulate cell metabolism because of it just doesn't need more metabolism, or there's some type of cellular stress or cellular threat, then the cell typically down-regulates thyroid hormone by deactivating T4 and T3. T4 is deactivated to something called reverse T3, okay? T3 is deactivated to something called T2, okay? Now, I'm saying deactivated, but even T2 has an active function within the cell. And some of the other things that can happen to thyroid hormones have active functions in the cell. So it's not really true to say deactivated, but we're going to use it to keep our conversation simple, okay? Now, reverse T3, once that thyroid hormone T4 is converted to reverse T3, it is shunted out of the cell into the serum so that it can get broken down, okay? So it really is important to me and to others in functional medicine to say, okay, what is happening to the T4 and T3 once it gets in the cell? Because once it gets in the cell, that's the important piece. If the cell is trying to deactivate it and we're seeing elevated levels of reverse T3 in the serum, then we have to say that, hey, the cells are deactivating it. There must be some type of stress response that's trying to downregulate cell metabolism. So we always want to be looking at reverse T3, but it gets more complex, unfortunately, because if you're not producing sufficient levels of T4, then you may not get high levels of reverse T3 because you don't have enough T4 to make high levels of reverse T3. So that's where we look at something called the T3 reverse T3 ratio or the free T3 to reverse T3 ratio to see what's the cell favoring. Is it favoring more T3 conversion or is it favoring more reverse T3 conversion? Not perfect test, but it's just another way for us to get an idea of what's going on.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, that's really sheds a lot of light on that topic that can be confusing, and it is so complex. Now, I've heard you use the term cellular hypothyroidism. Is that what you're referring to? It's like, what are the cells doing with the thyroid hormones? Yeah,
so remember, what drives the symptoms, right? The tiredness, the fatigue, the dry skin or whatever, is how much thyroid hormone is getting to the nucleus of the cell to stimulate metabolism. If you don't have sufficient levels of T3 getting to that nucleus, that's what's driving the symptoms, right? So I say hypothyroidism is really a spectrum disorder. Okay, it's not like you're here and that's it. It's primary hypothyroidism or nothing. I think it's a spectrum disorder, and it typically starts at the cellular level. There's some type of cellular stress that starts the cells to start to deactivate thyroid hormone. That creates symptomatology. Every one of us, when we're sick, have a virus, have a bacteria, right? When we get sick, we all have some level of cellular hypothyroidism going on because there's a bacteria or virus in our cells, and our body is trying to slow the metabolism down in that cell. Because if we have fast metabolism or replication of a cell that has a bacteria or virus in it, guess what we get? We get more virus, right? We actually help that virus kind of replicate. So what's the body doing? Hey, there's a threat here. Let's slow metabolism down, and by decreasing thyroid hormone physiology a bit, we actually activate something called autophagy, right? And autophagy is the self-eating. The cell starts actually cleaning itself up, cleaning up the debris, killing off the virus. And then usually 5 to 7 days, what happens? We killed the threat, we've got rid of the virus, and thyroid physiology kicks back into the cell, and we feel good again. The problem with most people is that they're under chronic stress, chronic infections, chronic things that are causing chronic deactivation of thyroid hormone, and so we have chronic symptoms. And this goes on when TSH is totally normal, when T4 volume in the blood is normal, when T3 in the blood is normal, because it's happening at the cell. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so can hypothyroidism be a protective mechanism?
Absolutely. I believe hypothyroidism is a protective mechanism. I don't think the cells or the body makes that many mistakes. Okay. And so I think it is definitely a protective mechanism by our cells to say, hey, there's a threat here, slow metabolism down. Let's deal with whatever the threat is. And we've got natural mechanisms to kick in to trying to deal with the threat. So if it's a bacteria or a virus or some other mechanism that's creating that chronic stress in the cell, the body's primary focus is, hey, slow down energy production, slow down mitochondrial function. You don't need to make energy right now. What we're going to do is we're going to start using that oxygen that we're using to create energy. We're going to use that oxygen to create reactive oxygen species, inflammatory products, things to kill whatever the threat is. That's on purpose. That's not an accident. Okay. And then there's something called the cell danger response. It's been written up really well by Dr. Robert Navio. And he talks about all the processes that go along with having this cellular stress going on: inflammation, the depletion of serotonin, the downregulation of thyroid hormone at the cell. There's so many pieces that go into it. But cellular hypothyroidism is the beginning of most people's problems, without a doubt.
So what happens? Like, what's next, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask. If somebody comes to you and they have what you can see is this, cellular hypothyroidism, can you paint us a picture of what effective treatment might look like?
Yeah. So first thing we want to do is we want to see, do they have that, right? So we not only do we run a comprehensive thyroid panel, but we also want to look at a comprehensive metabolic panel as a foundational thing. And a lot of people are like, my doctor does a comprehensive panel all the time. No, he doesn't. They don't run inflammatory markers. They don't run full iron panels. They don't run both 125D. I mean, it's just not comprehensive. But I feel for the person, because they're told this is a comprehensive panel, and it's not. It's just like they're told we ran a comprehensive thyroid panel on you with TSH and T4, and you would say, okay, he's an endocrinologist. They ran a comprehensive panel, but in reality, you don't know the difference, right? And so we want to look at that. I always want to look at their history, their timeline. What's their story? Because the answer to why most people are struggling is in their timeline or in their story. So you go back as far as you can and you start looking at the things that created stress and stress and stress. And now you can start to see why in their 30s or 40s, all of a sudden they started having chronic hypothyroid symptoms, or maybe even into their teens or 20s, they were starting to have those issues. And so you can see those problems coming. The next thing we want to do is we want to see where this hypothyroid spectrum has progressed, right? And so phase one, I always say, is this chronic stress response and the cellular deactivation of thyroid hormone, which drives the symptoms. And if that persists for an extended period of time, what happens is damaged cells, these cells under stress, release inflammatory chemicals, which alert the other cells that, hey, there's danger here. We got to do this at multiple cells. And these cells also release things called DAMPs and PAMPs. And these are these are just different molecules that are released from the cells to tell the immune system that, hey, we're breaking down DNA here, there's tissue damage, there's problems going on here. And the thyroid gland is uniquely responsive to these DAMPs and PAMPs, uniquely receptive to them. And so they can perceive these DAMPs and PAMPs really easily, and that can start to cause and activate the autoimmune response on the gland. And so then it's really important to see, is this person starting to have autoimmune on the tissue? Okay, so so we want to see if they're in autoimmune attack, right? And so we might look at thyroid antibodies, TPO antibodies, thyroglobulin antibodies. And if we see those elevating, or we see other indicators, then we know they're into autoimmune attack. Whether they've been diagnosed as hypothyroidism or not, or subclinical hypothyroidism, we know there's the glands under attack. And so how do we help these people? Is it more thyroid hormone? Do we give them a glandular? Do we give them just selenium? Do we try and reduce the inflammation? I think at the base thing we want to do with people who are struggling with chronic hypothyroid symptoms, depending on where it is in that spectrum, we want to get the root cause. We have to help them identify what the root cause of their issue is. And the problem is that we can't paint everybody into a box that everybody has hypothyroidism because they're selenium deficient, or everybody's got hypothyroidism because they're iodine deficient, or everybody's hypothyroidism because they're vitamin D deficient. It just doesn't work that well. What we have to look at is the foundational things that may be creating the stress or the cellular stress. And there's a number of things that can do it and can be varied for everybody. So the solution could be a little bit different for everyone.
And that's the thing, that's the problem for me, especially, or my issue with the whole thyroid, world that we're in right now, both you, me, Jenny, everybody, that even the functional medicine doctors kind of sometimes maybe paint it as an easy solution. And we're used to convenience. We're used to convenience here as Americans. Yeah. I mean, and we just really want the quick fix. And the problem is that it's just not. It just isn't. I mean,
it isn't.
You could start alleviating symptoms. Like you could help the patient start alleviating symptoms, and that would help them feel better so that they can start digging to what caused their issue to begin with. So that's something that can happen. But like from going from, I have Hashimoto's and then I'm taking Nature-Throid and then I'm all better, it doesn't really happen that way. And that's just kind of how we want it as Americans to be. And it just isn't, which is very unfortunate, because even on this show, people are going to be like, oh man, forget it, click, turn it off, like it's
tough because the stuff that most people need to do to improve their thyroid physiology is not sexy. Okay.
It's not.
It just isn't. And so everybody's looking for that miracle vitamin, that miracle drug. You can't drug yourself healthy. And you're not going to supplement yourself healthy in most cases. What you have to do is go back to root causes, which is one of the reasons why it's so important for people to write out their timeline. Because once they write out that timeline and they start to really look at all the things that's happened to them over their life, and you start helping them understand those things, they can say like, oh my gosh, all that stress, oh, the estrogen issue when I was having, when I was 15 and my irregular cycle was maybe an indication I was struggling with problems then. And all those things that happened along the way are the story that tells them how they got where they are. And so we have to help them understand that. There are some general things that we want to do with everybody. Definitely, dietary stuff, you could do all that stuff that's kind of the general frame, I think, within functional medicine. Those things aren't bad. But I think sometimes the guidance that we give people, even in functional medicine, is misplaced. And it's not, and this is going to sound bad, but what happens, I think, sometimes is somebody says something and we parrot that, and that gets parroted over and over and over again. And then everybody assumes that because so many people are saying it, that it must be true. I mean, it's like, don't eat eggs because eggs are high in cholesterol and cholesterol causes cardiovascular disease. I mean, we did that for what, 15, 20 years? And there are still people walking around saying, I don't eat egg yolks because they're high in fat and they're going to cause me to have cardiovascular disease. I mean, it's been disproven, but yet it was parroted by everybody, all of us. Parroted some of those things for years,
that
right?
That is bad, right? So there's fat-free cookies, and it just got insane, right? Fat is bad. So then it was crazy, and everybody started parroting it, and then now look where we are. Fat is good fat.
So we have to be really careful, and I know that most of the people I see aren't coming to see me as the first stop, right? They're coming to see me as at the end stop. And so the tough part is helping these people understand that, hey, the model you've been following, it doesn't work. The second thing is there's a ton of information and a ton of misinformation available on the web, and you're going to have a hard time deciphering what's the difference between the two. So what you have to do is you're going to have to put some confidence in somebody to help you, guide you through. I kind of look at myself as a Sherpa, right? I can help you get up the mountain, but if you kick me in the shins all the way up the mountain, I don't know how much I can help you, right?
Right.
You're creating more issues. So it's a tough situation for most people to be in, because they read a blog, it doesn't work. Then they go to the next one. Maybe they go to a functional medicine practitioner who does, and not all functional medicine practitioners are the same. That's important to understand. We all get some general training, but not everybody really truly understands thyroid physiology or iron physiology or vitamin D physiology. And so it's really important that people understand there's no quick fix. Anybody who's promising a quick fix, that's probably not the person you want to go see. Anybody who has the secret solution to fixing your thyroid problem is probably not the person, because there is no secret other than you have to address root cause issues. Then you have to get rid of those chronic stressors. Then you have to help the systems that have become dysfunctional or allostatic over extended period of time return to homeostasis, and that takes some nurturing and some help. And then we have to make sure that we're aware of what am I doing in my daily life, as maybe even as part of my daily habits and rituals and routine that are actually creating the stressors in my life, and address those. So it's work. It really is work.
It's work. And I know all of the listeners out there are like, oh no, but it just is. If you want to really reclaim your health, you have to be a health warrior and your own health advocate. And that's just the bottom line. And you're one of the people that we would go to get us up the mountain.
Well,
I would not kick you. I promise. I would not kick you.
I think we have to be open to a little complexity and to learning and finding the right person who can really understand the many, many levels and layers of this, in terms of thyroid stuff, but also everything else that's going on in the body. And, we were talking a little before the show about supplements and how one supplement can cause this whole chain reaction of other vitamins and minerals in the body. And I think that's why you see so many of the parroted sound bites online, because we want it to be simple. We want it to be as easy as just drinking lemon water when you wake up in the morning. And it's not. And it's a lifelong journey, and that you might figure it out for a while and have, a few good years of coasting, and then boom, you shift hormonally or something happens, the aging process brings some new challenge to your physiology, and you got to kind of go back to the drawing board. And that's sort of what it is, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you can get short-term benefits from almost any supplement that you're maybe look like you're deficient in, but we're not always deficient in a supplement or like a mineral. It may be that we're just not seeing it or measuring it appropriately. Calcium is a great example of that. I mean, how many hypothyroid patients show that they have low calcium on their blood work? I mean, it's rampant, right? And so then you have to say, okay, are all these hypothyroid patients just deficient of calcium? Well, where are we getting that calcium? Are you eating a whole food diet, lots of veg stuff? If you're eating a whole food diet, then you're getting calcium, right? It's there. So then we have to ask the next question, where's it going? Well, when we have a stress state, we have magnesium deficiency, which a vast majority of people are magnesium deficient. Where does calcium go? It goes into your tissues. And when you put calcium into your tissues, that calcium creates more stress. So we may not be seeing people that are actually calcium deficient because it's not in their diet. It's not in their, foods are loaded with fortified calcium. The issue is where's it going? We know that calcium will, especially when it's unopposed by magnesium, gets into the cells and tissues and wreaks havoc inside the cells. We know that, I see people that take calcium all the time because they think it's going to help their bone density. It is not. That supplemental calcium is not getting to their bone. That supplemental calcium may be contributing to their chronic arthritic and joint pain because that calcium settles into that cartilage tissue and just destroys the cartilage tissue. So, I mean, it's one of the most common things women take, especially who have hypothyroidism. They're taking all this calcium supplementation. It's probably one of the worst things we could ever do to them. They don't need it, and it's crazy.
Man, we covered a lot today. We could just keep going.
Yeah.
You are absolutely so fabulous to talk to and so intriguing. And you're one of those health warriors that I can't wait to see what happens in the future. I know you've got a book that you're working on, so we definitely want to have you back for that. What else is coming up for you before we have to say goodbye?
You know what? Right now, the big focus is trying to get the book done. I've brought on a friend of mine, Dr. Kelly Halderman, to help me try and get it finished, and so that's a huge thing. I'm headed to Minnesota to discuss. I partnered with US Enzymes to develop a product called sulforazyme. I don't know if you're familiar with sulforaphane, but sulforaphane is a component that's found in high concentration of broccoli sprouts, and sulforaphane is the best food upregulator of your NRF2 pathway, which is your natural anti-inflammatory, antioxidant detoxification enzyme in the body. So or protein in the body. So we developed this product because so many people are taking one-off antioxidants and they're taking SOD or glutathione or vitamin E or vitamin C. And really the best way to support antioxidant pathways isn't to just load the body with anti-inflammatories and antioxidants. It's to support the body's natural antioxidant and detoxification processes versus trying to do all these one-off supplements. So We partnered with US Enzymes. We're really happy to finally have it out. So I'm headed to Minnesota here in about 2 or 3 weeks to teach about sulforaphane and sulforazyme and antioxidant, anti-inflammatory stuff. Looking to get the book done and get that information out. People can always tune into the Thyroid Answers podcast. We do a podcast probably maybe 2 to 3 we try to release a month, and I am all over. You can, if you want to learn more about what I do with educate on thyroid stuff, we have something called thyroid. I do something called Thyroid Thursdays, and I have videos on our website, on Vimeo, YouTube. Put in Thyroid Thursday and you'll find me. And I've always got some kind of snippet going where I'm trying to teach somebody something about thyroid physiology.
Awesome. Well, lots of exciting stuff going on for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely.
We like to leave the listeners with a few actionable tips. Do you think you could do that for our audience today?
Absolutely. You tell me when you're ready.
We're ready.
All right. So number one, I would tell everybody you have to change your mindset about hypothyroidism. That is number one. For the vast majority of people, I would tell you that hypothyroidism is not the problem. Hypothyroidism is your body's protective response to some type of chronic stress, chronic threat response. So stop trying to fix your hypothyroidism and start changing your mindset to hey, my body and my cell is trying to protect me. This hypothyroid state is because there's some type of threat. Start changing that mindset. As soon as you start changing that mindset, you'll have a totally different look on this, and your solution won't be, I need to take more thyroid hormone, I need to take some type of glandular, I need to take some secret supplement. You'll start be looking like, hey, what's creating the stress in my cells and in my life? And that's how you're going to get long-term success. I know personally, I've had my thyroid antibodies were positive in the past as well. They no longer are, but it was all driven by how I was leading my life. Too much stress, too much heavy training. And so that's number one, change your mindset, right? It isn't the problem. It is the body's protective mechanism. Figure out what those problems are. The second thing is, before you ever consider going to a functional medicine practitioner, do step one, and that is clean up your diet. Okay? So eat a whole food diet. I know there's lots of different diets, paleo, autoimmune paleo, all different kinds of versions, FODMAPs, low FODMAPs diet, or specific carbohydrate diet, SIBO diet. Listen, number one thing that everybody can do to help themselves is eat more real food, eat less processed food. That is the number one thing that I can tell you to do. And if you haven't done that yet, before you go see a functional or integrative medicine practitioner, do that. Because guess what we're all going to tell you to do if we're good at this? We're going to tell you, stop eating all the junky processed food, because that's part of the reason why you are not doing well. And we didn't even touch about how these adulterated fats are driving hypothyroidism, but that's for another episode. So, but you do that first. You have to get yourself geared in. And if you're doing that and you're eating a whole food, real food diet, you don't have to worry about being gluten-free, because you will be. Because processed foods, if you're not eating processed foods, there's in whole food, real food, there isn't gluten. So you don't have to worry about what you have to give up. Just eat more real food, period, right? And even before you start worrying about organic, inorganic, just eat real food first. That's the biggest step you have to do. Third thing is, you got to work with either yourself or somebody objective, like a functional medicine practitioner. You have to look at what I call your fitness factors. And it's your fitness factors that help you determine what's creating the stress in your life. So what's your dietary fitness like overall? What are you eating? How often do you eat? When are you eating? What's your sleep fitness like? Do you get good quality sleep? Are you resting appropriately? Do you breathe appropriately at night? Are you snoring and mouth breathing? That creates hypoxia, which makes you hypothyroid. What's your physical fitness factors like? Are you over exercising, which creates excessive stress, which can induce your hypothyroidism? So many of your listeners have been told, exercise more, eat less, that will fix your weight issues. And when you do excessive stress, excessive exercise, and you don't allow yourself to heal and repair, you are going to have chronic inflammation. You're going to induce cellular hypothyroidism. I did it to myself. Emotional fitness is huge. What's going on in your mind that may be more driving stress in your life? What are you thinking about? What are you telling yourself? Are you identifying yourself as a sick person, a person who's got a disorder, a person who's not happy? You got to fix that piece. You got to address your respiratory fitness. If you are a mouth breather, you will create hypoxia and you will induce hypothyroidism. And then we want to look at habitual fitness. What do you do every day, all day, that may be creating that stress in your life? And there's a number of other factors too. I know this has to be 3 minutes, so I'm going to cut it short. But those are the things that have to be addressed, are the fitness factors. That's how you identify what is causing problems in your life. And there's more than I didn't get it all the way through. So, but those are the things that need to be done.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today on Thyroid Refresh TV. It's been so enlightening, and we really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us and our listeners.
Hey, I appreciate you having me on, and you guys did great on our podcast, and maybe we'll have you guys back on. Maybe if this doesn't bomb, I'll be back on your podcast sometime soon, okay?
Bye. Thank you, guys. See you next time.
Thanks, guys. Take care.